Welcome to Crossroads in Dance. I'm Maya Sapera. I'm your host for today. Today, we're going to talk with David Hernandez. David Hernandez is an internationally renowned dancer, choreographer, teacher, and producer. He's living in Brussels, so we are very lucky to have him here in Belgium. He's from Miami, but he left his footprint all over Europe. So, welcome, David Hernandez. Please tell me, how did you first get to Belgium?
Um, how did I first get to Belgium? Actually, I originally arrived here with Meg Stewart back in the very beginning, before there was the company Damaged Goods. She had done one creation that then was seen by some people from what was then called the Klapstuk Festival in Leuven. And they invited her and gave her a residence to work on a kind of the next stage of her work, which was a quartet called No Longer Ready Made. And so I first visited here with her in a residence in Klapstuk. And then from there, the piece got produced here in Belgium and with some other European co-producers. So I was going back and forth in that time between New York and Belgium, and sometimes back home to Miami. And finally ended up deciding to put up my house here for a little while, and now it's been, I don't know how many years, 30 years or something since that time, and I'm still here.
Wow, so we're lucky to have you here. I heard that you have had also some time in Berlin before coming to Brussels.
No, actually, I've been based in Brussels since almost the beginning. First, we were based in Leuven, but I also had a kind of residency, and I have some collaborators, friends of mine that we've been working with for years. So I was living a little bit, almost like in the two cities, spending almost half of my year there and half of my year here for many years. Yeah.
Okay, nice. When I looked you up and I studied a bit what you did. One big thing which came across was collaborations. You had collaborations with so many people, so many great people of so many different fields. So I think it's something very, very coming from your creations. And
Yeah.
I will read the name because it's a difficult name. I felt the set design of Zdravka. I'm saying correct? Ivan Lisa?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yeah, really a very nice combination with your choreography. That was in the
Oh,
Lone
thank
Hunter. Yeah, really very nice. And I thought
you.
maybe, yeah, yeah. I thought maybe it's nice if you can say something, elaborate on your collaboration with it's her or it's
It's a her. Yes, it's a woman. It's a
okay.
female. Yes. Actually, it's funny. It's true. Collaborations have always been kind of an important part of my work, and I don't know. In the last 10 years, it's often that when you're producing your own work and you're a small company, you don't always have the money for sets and things like this. But it became more and more important to me to have a very strong visual element to the work. I had been going I was actually invited by a woman named Petra Raskanic, who is a friend from a long time ago when she was in Seed studying and I was teaching there and we met. And she invited me to come teach in Croatia. And while I was teaching there, I gave a workshop to the Zagreb Dance Company and eventually ended up making a creation for them called The Devil's Garden. And for this, we needed to have a set designer, so I met several people, and I met Zdravka as one of those possible participants. And I don't know, I kind of fell in love with her the minute I met her. She's a very specific character. She's super, I don't know, she's got this kind of fashion side, and she's got an interesting mind, and somehow the way that we click and the way that we can work together was really exciting. And I could kind of tell from the first moment that I met her, I was like, it's this one. Let's work with her. And what was interesting is that it was a project where, in Croatia, they struggle even more than in some places because the money is very low for dance and stuff. So we had to really find a lot of ways to make things happen where it was not very obvious to make them happen, and came up with a very beautiful set design and a very beautiful piece that was very much appreciated. And from that moment, I had these other commissions that were coming up, and because of the connection that I felt with her, we started calling each other my twin, because we would have a kind of way of connecting that was really like boom. And so I invited her to then go to Malmo with me for this larger project for the Malmo Opera and Skånes Dance Theater, Lonely Hunter.
Yeah, it's nice how now you talk and you can see that. Even I saw the production on the screen, not in the real life on the screen, but you can see that there is a connection between the choreography and the visual effect. Even I could feel that sometimes like it was like a painting which came to life, and sometimes it froze and then again it came to life, and I thought it was a really very nice effect. So I'm wondering, when you choreograph, do you think also in paintings and visual effects, or how does it go?
Yes, and not only. For me, the visual aspect is really important, especially that particular piece, Lonely Hunter. There were kind of these different layers of choreography, which was what was interesting. And we had, it was quite a big production with a live orchestra and everything. So it takes a process like that, takes 2 years, 2.5 years. And we had been through 4 different set designs until we settled on this one. And what was interesting about it was with the fabrics, you had to choreograph the fabrics as well as the people. And so this was a kind of whole thing about how to create these pictures and make something happen in the picture, and then reform the picture and make something happen in that picture, and how to make those things congruous and make them make sense together. I have a really visual imagination, but I started off and still am a musician. So it's kind of like strangely like a visual music. I don't really know a better way to say it. There's some filmic ideas in there. I feel quite influenced by a lot of different things because I've actually been lucky to have worked in all these different fields, and I still kind of do. I still work as a musician. I was working as a visual artist for a while. And so in a way, what's nice about that is that it enables you to kind of take the tool that tells the story the best at the time, because you have a little bit of experience with it. And I think that's what's great about the dialogue with Zdravka, is that she can meet me halfway from a visual art sense, and that helps to kind of push things further. She counter proposes all the time. That's something that I love, because I tend to be somebody who's a bit control freak about stuff, and I have my finger in all the pots. So it's really great when that doesn't make someone get shy, but they come and meet the dialogue. And that's something that relationship is really great, because it has a dialogue.
I think what you said also about this visual music, I think you said like, or musical, no, visual music. I think that's also something, something which I also saw in your work, like how dancers were together in direction in music, but not always in the movement, but yet you could feel that they are together, or the staccato and then the longer notes, or the color of the notes, which you could really see in the movements. And the stops which are there, I could see, there it's a musical interpretation. And then when I went reading also, because I like to first look and then read to see which impression it gives to me. When I went reading, I saw, but you have a musical background, so that might be the reason why. So I don't know if you can say something about the music and the dance. How does dance relate to music and music to dance for you?
Well, maybe I can start from that piece and then branch out a little bit, because I was also lucky to be able to commission a score for the live orchestra. So that was what was really wonderful about that particular project, is that everything was coming from 0 point. It wasn't like I was choosing a music and then just putting that on. the score was being written, as the decor was being done, as everything was growing up together, which also makes a very nice cohesion, but is a big challenge. And you have to be able to speak kind of in the language with each of the collaborators. And it was Szymon Broszka who made the music for this piece. And I think the way that I approach music is often almost like writing another voice into the music rather than only just relying or leaning on the music or being influenced by the music. So that's quite a particular way. And I think that's because of the fact that I'm a musician as well. And that's actually the most training. I started off in music very, very young. And that's been a thing I've been doing more my whole life. I didn't ever see myself as only a dancer or choreographer, actually, because I do wear these different hats. And with the music, I think for me, I started to realize a while ago that most of my compositional tools, most of my kind of influences had come from a musical background, which I think is true with a lot of dance, in fact. But for me, it became almost more of the point, like I was saying, of like writing the dance as another voice in the music that sometimes is in dialogue with the music, sometimes it follows the music, sometimes it's led by the music, but there's a kind of playfulness between the choreography and the music that it's dancing with.
Very nice, very nice. And I think also it's nice that you share that you are wearing different hats, because here in Belgium sometimes I feel that people say, oh, you have to choose, or you are a dancer, or you are a musician, or you are this kind of dancer, or this. Yeah, I think it's nice that to see that people like you who work on a great level, that you are wearing different hats, so it's possible, and I think it's a beautiful thing to have a variety of expression tools with you. And when you were talking about this music, and music like dance becomes a voice in the music and music relates to dance, it made me think also about what I'm gonna go to look. I don't know if I say it correct. Hula balu? Hula balu? Yep.
Hullabaloo.
Hullabaloo?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There where I see that Michel, he makes the music, but then you also join him in making the music with your body, and then he also joins you on the scene, dancing. So there is also one of the places where I thought, okay, this is really becoming one big orchestra, or one big dance, or one big, I don't know, one big art. Yeah. So I see that you work quite sometimes with him, and also with Zoe McFerrin.
Zoe and I only did one project together, but Michel and I have done many together. Yes.
And how do you collaborate then with other musicians? How do you bring them into the project?
I think that there are for sure some ways and things that I have kind of in common, with from one project to the next. But I think I'm also somebody who really I'm inspired by each situation, and I feel that you have to bring your tools with you, but there's not one way to work with everybody. So if I'm working with Michel, it's going to be a really, really different scenario than with someone else. And this is also maybe connecting to the fact that I'm an improviser as well, both with voice and with dance. And I've done a lot of work improvising live with musicians and performance and stuff like this, which kind of gives you a way to set up a way of dealing with each other. I think it helps that I can speak the language a little bit, but it goes down to kind of feeling, and each person is really different. Working with Szymon, who was writing a score for the piece in Malmo, was very interesting and also tricky. It was the first time that we've ever worked together on something. I had always liked his music. He's written many compositions for many companies, including Sidi Larbi Shetkawi. He's made several compositions for him. And actually, he was somebody who I had met years ago, and we had wanted to do something together. And this was the first time I had the opportunity. And because it was a large orchestral music and the nature of the project, it was a super different way of working. I think I drove him a little crazy for a while until we found the right thing, you know, because I'm quite specific about the interaction of how things should go. And there were certain pieces that came poof right out, and he just hit something that then influenced me. And then other things where I was looking for something really, really specific, and it took us a while to find it. And I felt bad because I kept sending it back like, maybe this one doesn't work yet. And then he had to do another thing with Michel, because I also sing with his band, Robbe d'Elephant Orchestre. And we've taught workshops together as well, music and dance many times. We actually met through teaching, and there's kind of a funny story with that, because back when I was still in New York, I had a friend who was making work there named Randy Warshaw, who made very beautiful pieces. And I had seen a piece to this music of a band called Trio Bravo. And I loved it so much that I went out and I bought every CD that I could find, which at that time was, I think, 2. And I listened to them like this, and I was like, one day I want to make a piece to this music, because the instrumentation is so interesting. It was like a tuba and a drummer and a wind player. And I was like, what a strange instrumentation for a trio, but cool. And then years later, I was teaching at Parts, and the Parts put us together to teach a movement and dance workshop, and we started talking. And he was curious to get to know about me, so he came over one day after one of the classes. Sorry, it's a long story, and wanted to talk. And when he played his music for me, I said, "Oh my God, I know this sounds terrible to say that it sounds like this, but it sounds like this music that I really loved." And I showed him the CDs. He was like, "This is my first trio. How did you find this music?" And all of those years back, I had been listening to his music, and then we finally met together. And since then, we've been doing a lot of different kinds of productions together. And he's working in a really another way. He's super direct. He's really liégeois, and we throw ideas and bounce them back and forth. He works a little bit more like how musicians rehearse and how dancers rehearse is very, very different. Musicians, that's like 1-2 rehearsals, the gig is tomorrow, boom, and we go, So finding that way to kind of shorthand things, and specifically for Hullabaloo, I kind of wanted to put the music in the focus, and we had a lot of dialogue about the creating of it's a mix of recorded music and live music, but I also wanted his presence on stage. So this was I think the one that was the mix of all the different possibilities that we can do, from composing together to working on the music together to him actually being live on stage. And since then, we've done many, many other things together as well, of really different natures. So that's kind of interesting with him, because it's very polyvalent in the way that sometimes he makes music for me, sometimes I'm singing in his band, sometimes we're teaching together, sometimes, the relationship has seen a lot of different sides. And we just finished the project that I directed for his group Collectif de Lyon, just before we had the lockdown again. So we were really lucky. We got to actually show it here in Brussels at Espace Mag, called Repercussions, which is then now a mix of text and music and movement. So yeah.
Yeah, I like also how he uses indeed texts. Like there were some Indian sounds, and there were also English, and also the breath. The breath is also like a musical instrument.
Yeah.
Connected to the dance. It was a really nice combination. Yeah.
Well, that's, for instance, an interesting thing, because the breath percussion is something that I have done in several pieces. So that was something that I brought to the table, and that he and I did together. And then he brought in his Indian influences that he's been teaching with, that I had been learning from teaching together. So we really could bring from all sides things inside to make that creation.
Really nice. Now, let's say, okay, you want to make a new production. How does it work? Do you have an idea and you say, okay, I have this idea, I want to put it into the world, or somebody is asking something to you, or does it come from a collaboration? How does a new production get born?
That's extremely varied as well. I have to say that for sure, in Europe and getting used to how things work here radically changed how I make things. But the way that each project is born is really different. If it's commission, it has certain constraints or demands that come from depending on what place is asking me to do what. If it's our own project that we produce with DH Plus, our own production entity, that then already has to go through a dossier process. So when you have to apply for money and find money, you're spending time kind of selling your idea and forming your idea before it ever goes in to see if you get the money. And then when you get the money, you keep refining from this point. So that's a very different process than if I'm making something for Malmo Opera or Zagreb Dance Company or a company in Berlin. Or it can be really, really different. According to, I think, more clearly what you are asking me, I had trouble in the beginning because I came from making work in the States. And for me, it was always like, all right, maybe there's this idea or a direction. And then I see how that goes. And then I see what situations I have and how much money I have. And so then I make it like all the factors kind of decide what it is. And here, when I had to sit down and start having my first meetings to try to ask for support, it was hard because I had like plan A, B, C, D, E. Like, I was like, if you give me this much money, I can do that. And if you give me this much money, I can do that. And sometimes I smelled the direction. I didn't have like a beautiful plan in gorgeous words that make everybody want to buy it. So this was a big adjustment for me because people were like, no, what is your project? You're telling me 4 possibilities, but what are you selling me? You know, and this has always been a little bit of a struggle for me, how to put my imaginations into something that's clear enough so that people can want to participate in it and support it. So that's changed over the years, which is why a few years ago, with a piece called Sketches on Scarlatti, we had applied for a project of mine called Crowd, where we had already done some residences for, and we wanted to include like different kinds of bodies, amateur bodies, handicapped bodies, all these different capable bodies, and dancers and different ages, etc. And we did some beautiful residencies, but then we didn't get the money for this project. So I ended up having a premiere date and no piece to make. So I decided to make this thing because I really love Baroque music, and I had wanted to make something to this Scarlatti music for a while. We made the first draft of it in 2 weeks in a residence in Bonn. And in a way, the reason I mentioned that one is because it grew up in a way of how I used to make pieces before, where I'd find a thread and start pulling on it, and then the piece would kind of reveal itself. And now sometimes I have to have so much planned before that I don't get that opportunity as much anymore. And so when I can have that kind of period, I think there's almost like 2 kinds of pieces that I work on, projects. All right, here's a project where everything's planned. I know what direction I'm going in. There's always a lot of research in what I do because I need that in order to make everything. And then the second branch is like things where I'm almost discovering the face of the project as I start to make it.
Yeah, I think that's actually the most natural way. And I think it's also a nice thing to say loudly that, okay, we ask, or the government asks from the artist to have everything planned. But as an artist, you should be free to create. So it's good that you're able to do that and give them what they want in order to create, because you make really beautiful things. And I think there are people out there who cannot do that, like structure and form, because it's true. It depends on the way you're going, on who you're meeting, on how body is reacting.
Well, and then you start to find a way to kind of create a frame that's flexible. And that's interesting when you can find that. It's not always easy, you know, like when you can find a frame where if I tell it to you and you might want to support it, it's enough information that you go, oh, that could be interesting. But then still I have the room to grow inside of that frame. But that's a hard balance to find before you've even started one rehearsal.
Yeah. Very interesting. I see that you work also together for the production with Cacao Bleu. Is it the base of your company, or how should I see the
Yes, it's kind of the partner company. Like, because I used to have my own way many years ago when I first started, and the management of that we shifted, and they went their way and I went on. We had to find kind of a business model where Cacao Bleu almost became like a host for many of my projects. And because Lenneke Raskaerts is my production manager, and we've worked together on many creations now, when it's the ones that are produced in Belgium. And so Cacao Bleu became a bit like a kind of umbrella organization in which DH Plus could function.
Mm-hmm. Because I understand that you are also carrying a lot of the production yourself as a choreographer. It's a work together. Sorry.
What do you mean?
I mean that of course you are choreographing, you're putting the things into place and on the scene, but are you also a part of the selling, the organizing part of your productions?
Yes. I have to say, without Lenneke, it would be impossible because we all have to do more jobs than what we have to put too many hats. There's some of the hats I would gladly give away, and those ones of like the selling and the da da da. But also because we're a small organization, there's certain things. Lenneke handles a lot of the business and the books and the things like this, but I also bring in a lot of co-productions and invitations to places and try to sell the work and create relationships with different houses that will support the work and bring us to perform. Because also the market has been changing in the last, 10, 15 years quite a lot. Co-productions are really less than they used to be. The way that things work, way back when I first began, you gave a DVD, or actually you gave a VHS tape to people. They watched these tapes and then they invited some people, or you had a meeting or whatever. You don't get a job, like you don't get a gig like this anymore. It's people can't even watch everything that they're sent. The same with emails. Like if you're just relying on sending emails to people, like it gets lost in the spam of all the other choreographers. So you have to start building these relationships and going places, encountering people, creating relationships was the way that we're able to make things happen. And I do take a lot of responsibility in this, in collaboration with Lenneke.
Great. I see also that your productions, you have like really small productions with duo, I saw on duo, and then you have those large productions like this hunter. So, do you have a preference for something, or which place does every category takes?
I think I kind of need to make them all. I think I have to be honest that the ones with larger groups is something like the Malmo piece. I could never produce this by myself. This was a commission from the Malmo Opera and Skånes Dance Theater, who have a budget for such a thing, because this like Hullabaloo from our production was the biggest we ever did and almost killed us. It was so heavy. It was only 7 people on stage and on tour 9 people. But for a small organization, it's huge. And so because of that difficulty to be able to do those things, I really enjoy when I'm able to work in a larger scale, because it's something that I don't get to do as much. But I think if I couldn't make the duos and quintets and quartets and stuff, I think it would also be a bit weird. I think I wouldn't want to only make these monstrosities, and I often think that the research that we're doing on the smaller productions that we can produce here are the things that give us the keys and the tools to be able to make the larger things when we have the opportunity.
Yes. Let's say you have a concept and you sold it, and you have to start to build the choreography. How do you start the research for movement? How does that start?
Yeah. I mean, not to sound like a broken record, but it really depends on the project. It's very different in different ways. Movement language is really important for me. So I'm usually developing what kind of language the show is going to be in. So I'll start investigating by myself or with one dancer. It depends how the music is or what the theme of the project is. It might take different kinds of research. Then usually I will do, even sometimes before I've written the dossier, I'll do some research sessions where I invite a few dancers and we go into the studio for a week, 10 days, and try out some of these themes, try out some of these things I'm looking for. And then things start to get a little more clear once I have my hands in the clay, you know. Other times, there have been pieces where I'm kind of person who I've been called a kind of editor. That's a bit the way that I work, like an editor. But in order to edit something, you have to have something. So it's often where it's important for me to just start building. I just start building and building, and then I start to look at what I have and I go, oh no, this is a tangent. Let's get rid of that. Okay, now we go over here. And that, because for me, none of it is lost. It's all information. Even if I work on something that's not the right direction, then at least I know that's not the right direction. So that sometimes it works from that way, that I'm like, all right, we have to put up and create some material, a bit like this saying where they talk about Michelangelo used to say that the sculpture was already in the stone, he just had to uncover it. For me, the idea is that the stone's not even built. We have to build the stone and then we can uncover the statue. So it's that idea of like creating, looking at all the different interests. For instance, I made a quartet in Berlin where I knew I wanted to work on the idea of collisions of all different types. So we started working on many different ways of colliding, and not just physical collisions, but emotional collisions and spatial collisions and you know. And like this, zooming around this idea, we started to get into something quite particular that became this piece that I made, I think it's 3 years ago now, called Methods of Remembering. And it was like this idea also of colliding with your own ideas of things that happened, and how everybody's ideas of what happened might be slightly different, even though they were in the same event, and the kind of bump and awkwardness of remembering things. So this became that piece, for instance.
Yeah. And which role do the dancers of your piece have in this creation process? Do you say what they have to do and then you see how it looks like, or is it a process that you go together?
There's many different ways, and I think that's what's challenging, and I hope rewarding about working with me on certain projects, is that I'll always come in, because the way I've been building up a movement vocabulary over the years is quite specific. So I'm not so interested in just having dancers go in a corner and make me a phrase, and then I come and I make a kind of collage out of their thing. But at the same time, I don't want them just to be robots doing what I tell them. So I'm looking for some sort of hybrid mix of this thing. So often I will start by bringing in a vocabulary. This vocabulary might never be done in the way that it's brought in. So let's even say it's a phrase of movement or a block of movement. That we learn it almost like we're learning a language. And then from this, I have these different compositional tools. I call them composition machines that I put in action. And so they need to create and bend this material and create within this universe of this language that we've created. And then I'll watch it and we refine it together. It's a lot like animation. I don't know if you've ever seen a documentary about how they build animated films, but how you have this team. It's quite amazing. You'll have people who work for 2 years on 30 seconds of this movie, and that's their part. And there's 100 other people working on 30 seconds as well. They come and they go in this direction, then they come and bring what they've done into a meeting of the whole staff with the director and everybody, and there's comments, oh, maybe this could be like this, They go back and work on it again. They bring it back, and like this, that 30 seconds gets refined. And I think this reflects quite well how we work on what we build. It's this process of creating a team with one direction in one kind of movement language where everyone has to be both performative and creative.
Yeah, interesting. And you said before that you have also experience in improvisation. Do you use also improvisation when you create choreographies?
Yes, yes. I'm very fond of really writing and things being very written. It's often, sometimes, for instance, this piece, Methods of Remembering, I told you about. It's funny because it's one of the most, my work tends to be very detailed, and it's one of the most detailed and complex works I've made recently. And most people think it's improvised when they see it. They're always asking me, is this set? Because they kind of can't believe that all of that's set, but it is. And then there's other things that are quite improvised, but that look set, and there's all kind of different variations on this. But especially for a big period of about, again, like in 2000, around this area, I was working on something that I called elastic composition, elastic choreography, with the idea that also the dancers had decisions to make while they were dancing. So some things were set and some things were open. So this is another hybrid version that we'll do sometimes. I almost never put anything a pure open improvisation on side. There's always a direction and there's always kind of parameters. And then even sometimes some pieces I've made where we use improvisation to set the piece. So we're building through run-throughs, I call it, where we have certain things and then certain things get decided, like landmarks, and then we improvise between these landmarks, and little by little the thing gels and finds its form. So many different ways, because I feel like the universe of improvisation is really vast, and we call a lot of different things improvisation that are in fact extremely different from each other. The only thing that they have in common is that the movement is not completely set. But there's a huge range between a structured improvisation, a wide open improvisation for performance, an improvisation for research, an improvisation for physical health or exploration. There's so many facets of this that are so different, but we call it all improvisation. So I think it's a real vast subject.
Yeah, indeed, vast. So we had about the choreography, and there are also different aspects which elaborate the choreography. We had the set design, but you have also the lights, for example.
Yes.
I think for My Beloved, or I don't know.
And My Beloved?
Yes. There, I felt that the use of the light was quite special.
In which way?
There is the fact that it starts with the shadow and then it opens slowly. That slowly you discover the scene. So yeah, I thought that was a nice use of the light, and of course not only this, but this where the light stuck to me. So what was your idea behind the use of the light in that piece?
Well, I can preface that by giving a tiny background to the fact that what I've been lucky about as well, because I'm so interested in research and because I've done many different kinds of projects, I had a lot of time to play with lighting instruments and stuff like this, like in a space, in a garage, and we set up our own lights and we try things and blah, blah, blah. And even in my living room, I used to make videos where I have my little pin lights down in my cab and I bring them up and make things. And so I kind of learned also about this. So I never asked somebody to just come in and make lights for me, which also you have to find the right person, because some people are a bit like, that's my job, shut up, you know. So you have to have someone who likes to have that dialogue, because I'm often saying, for me, all of the elements in a story, in a stage piece, they're all part of the story. They're all a dancer on stage. They're all like, the lights should be as important as everything else. They have to find a balance together. And in this project that you're talking about, And My Beloved, which I made for Susanne Linka's company when she was in Staatstheater Trier a few years ago, I invited two Belgians that I've also worked on a lot, set designers that I've worked on a lot of pieces for, Saskia and Katrijn. And we didn't have we worked with the lighting staff of the opera, of the Staatstheater, but we kind of were pushing the design. So there wasn't, in that moment, a light collaborator that I've done in other pieces, like I've worked on in other pieces. So it was really serving the function of the scenographic ideas that we had. And we wanted to kind of have this kind of, it's interesting how you said it, almost that this window opens slowly on this world, that it kind of slowly opens and reveals itself to you. And we were working on a little bit of a dystopian feeling of like the premise that I was giving was this idea that human beings seem to just construct and deconstruct all the time. They build up stuff and then they destroy it. And they build it up again and they destroy it again. And this seems to be the theme throughout our human history. And so I kind of wanted to take this as a basis. So we had this scene we wanted to do, which was almost the idea of people living in a ruins, and that they were reforming these ruins all the time to whatever their needs were at the time. And so it was the idea to kind of like slowly open this window on this place, and then watch all the interactions that were happening. So the demand for light came really from how to functionally make this happen.
And it succeeded. Really beautiful. Yeah, because I think it's not always easy to collaborate with light designers, because you have your idea in your head. They might have their idea or what they think is good and not good. And I think it's not an easy job to do, to collaborate with.
I think you're right. I think you have to really find the right person, because like I said, some people don't want you to mess in their business. I have had one or two experiences where I really decided beforehand that I wanted that element of light to be almost an input, so that I was reacting to it. But that's a rare situation for me, because I kind of feel like it's so important how that is at play with the dance, that it would have to only be somebody who, I had asked one person one time for this, and we ended up not being able to do the project together, but because I had seen several pieces of his where his light was like an installation. And I was very interested in the kind of environments he was creating. And so I was like, okay, this is one where we're going to dialogue, but I'm not going to come in with, this is what I'm looking for. I'm more like, what kind of environment are you creating? And I want to react to that environment. So in that case, that's a very specific scenario. I think that can be really a lot of fun and very interesting. In other cases, I really need to find someone who has a very clear voice and isn't going to be pushed over, but who's going to let me collaborate with them. And that's, and even sometimes have a lot of the main concepts come from me. Like I can say this piece I made years ago called Bipolar. The idea that I had was that I wanted the lights to be like clouds moving over the sun. So the light was slowly changing all the time. How he did this, and everything was up to him technically to kind of tell me. And actually we ended up that the lighting designer, Hans Meyer, who I've worked with on many projects, we have also a very nice dialogue. He was actually improvising the lights, structured improvisation during the show. So it was interesting because I maybe brought in the umbrella concept, but he ended up becoming like a dancer in the piece because the lights were never the same. If you saw the piece from one night to the next, you might not notice that they were super different because the effect was the same. But he was completely responding to the performance as it was happening. So it's interesting because then you end up building a lot of different kind of interesting relationships. And I think people who enjoy that enjoy working with me because they get taken a little outside their box and they might do something a little different and they're like, oh, that's cool. You know, like where they're not just doing their thing that they're always doing the same way all the time.
I think that's how one grows as an artist.
Yeah, and how you also affect each other. I like where we all come out of the creation going, I never would have done that without you. And that everybody says that about the other one. Like, wow, I never would have made this piece the same way if you weren't there. And then the lighting designer says, yeah, me neither. I never would have done these lights for anybody else. And the set designer, yeah, I never would have made it, And these are the kind of projects where I feel like when we all sit down at the end and go, this is a product of our conversation. Doesn't look like the last piece I did or the one I'm going to do after. It's really specific to this meeting that we had and this conversation we had.
That's a real collaboration. So we had the lights and we had the set design. There is also the costume design. You could see the costume design as a visual aspect. How does the audience look at the image which the costume designs add? You could see it as it should be free for the dancer to move, or should it bring the dancer into a certain direction of movement or non-movement, because it can also restrict the dancer. So how do you look at costume design?
Again, my staple answer. Sorry?
By the way, I saw that you use really different kind of visual results. I mean, I see color, I see in one kind of palette, I saw different kind of designs coming into your...
Yes. Well, it's been often, especially for the productions we produce in Belgium, where usually it's often that the scenographer is also doing the costumes. So I'm often working with someone that can do both. And again, there's a collaboration on that, and it really depends from piece to piece. What I can say is that I'm not against it, because I think there are some pieces where that really works to have a kind of uniform or costume, I have a hard time when the things look too costumey for most of the things that I do. They should serve the purpose to kind of create this character on stage, but they shouldn't draw attention to themselves unless the concept of the piece is to draw attention to the costumes or to almost negate the costumes and create a visual plane with the costumes where they serve a function of almost becoming part of the set, the visualness of the piece. So we really go into how does it balance with the set? How does it balance with the kind of people that we're working with? How does it make the different personalities of the different dancers be a bit amplified so that you kind of get a sense of not just a two-dimensional dancer, but a three-dimensional being that's telling this story, So that becomes an important part of it. There have been some pieces where I'm interested in the costumes restricting, or where they have a purpose, a visual purpose that they need to fulfill. Like one scene in a piece I made many years ago, where it needs to look like the dancer is floating. So all the people that are manipulating the dancer are in black with black hoods and stuff, and the dancer is just in shorts, and you see a lot of skin so that they kind of look like they're floating through the space. That could be an example where there's a kind of choreographic demand that means that these costumes need to be like this. With Sketches on Scarlatti, we were working with a certain palette of 3 colors, and the piece was going from black and white to color. And the color was being introduced little by little, almost like when they colorized the black and white films, that you see, some bits of color coming in, and then by the end we're in more color. So there can be many different ways like this, but either the costume is part of the concept and then that has to be clearly and logically mapped out, or it's more something discrete that's more about developing the dancer as a character, and that they don't draw attention to themselves in terms of like, oh, that's a costume, but you just accept it as part of the personality of this character you're meeting.
Okay. I'm sure that, like everyone and every artist, you also came across some obstacles when creating some of your productions. Maybe it's also nice to share an obstacle that you dealt with, and how, in which way did you deal with it? Because it's something which in many artists will be able to relate, I think.
Well, that's a big question. There's been a lot of obstacles. It's true. It's not an easy thing to do to get a dance production going up. And I don't only make dance productions, but I have to say I've been lucky to have worked with a lot of different size budgets. What's amazing is no matter what the size budget you have, you always got risk running out of money. Like, because the more you have, the more you're like, oh, now we can do this and this, you know, and then you're like, oh, it costs that much. Okay, no, you know, like, so I've never been in a project with like an endless budget where I can just do what I want. And I actually think that was probably good, because that obstacle sometimes reins you in and gets you closer to the idea that as it should be. Whenever, if you would just have all the freedom to do whatever you want, you might just get lost in your kind of fantasy of everything, and then it maybe doesn't make a lot of sense. But I think one thing I would say is that sometimes people look at my CV and they just think, oh, wow, you have a really good CV and you've done a lot and you've just been lucky. Well, we haven't been that lucky. We've had to kind of push for everything, and being an American who just shows up in Belgium and goes like, I'm going to make my home here. And, you know, this kind of stuff was already an obstacle. Like, how do I get my dossiers done in Flemish? How do I, you know, like even the most simple things sometimes, like when I first came here was in 93. And it was not so evident even to get my papers legally and everything. It took me 10 years to be legally here. And this was a huge challenge, where one time I was packing my car to get ready to go on tour, and the police showed up to tell me that I have to leave the country in 2 weeks. And there was some mistake with my papers, and finally it all got sorted out. But I said to the policeman, like, I brought down my grant letter, like, you guys just gave me this many thousands of euros to make a piece, and now you're telling me I have to leave the country. Something's not right. And he looked at me like, yeah, something's wrong. So, you know, there's been an obstacle on all different stages, how to find support, which is getting harder and harder. I think you just kind of, when you're lucky, you have some good people around you that are willing to take on that obstacle with you and to find solutions together. And you can't give up. You have to just keep pushing at it. And it gets really tiring. I have to be honest that I've come recently, just before the whole quarantine business happened, I was on a period of about 5 years where in the last 3 years of those 5 years, just before quarantine, I'd made something like 8 different premieres. It was in different countries. It was really like the Malmo project was going at the same time as another project. And then I went to Berlin and meeting, and it was a great moment of a lot of stuff, but it was really taxing. And I ended up coming to a bit of a burnout. And then quarantine happened. I was like, whoa, you know, now I'm locked down. And you do sometimes get to the point of feeling almost like Sisyphus. You know this Greek myth where the guy's pushing the rock up the hill and he gets it to the top and then it rolls down again. And there are times where you go like, I don't know if I can start pushing that rock up the hill again. You know, how many times am I going to do this? And at the same time, somehow you take a little moment and then you start pushing. And you start pushing again. And maybe you have 1 or 2 people are going to push with you, you know, and you find a way. I think that the obstacles is almost part of the way of life of the artists. You know, it's like, that's kind of what we do, is we test the limits. And can we push into this wall? Okay, if I push hard, will it push over? Oh no, okay, I have to push on that wall. Okay, let me go push on that one and see what'll happen, you know. And that's been part of the big part of the experience. It's exhausting and sometimes very demoralizing, and also quite rewarding whenever you make it happen. And I think the last thing I'll say about that is that, I mean, other than what I believe is in the importance of the arts in our world, not just in the art scene, there's something amazing about coming together with a group of people and mobilizing them and getting this collective energy going somewhere. And what happens humanly between people whenever you have this thing to concentrate on together and to obstacles to remove and to get over, it's very rich. And it's a thing that I think a lot of people, as much as it really tires me out and sometimes make me think I can't do it anymore, it's also extremely rich as a human experience, and a thing that maybe a lot of people don't get to experience as our world gets further and further away from humanity and more into kind of this virtual technical space in a way. Get to feel the blood, sweat, and tears and the bones of people and finding a way to move forward together, it does something to you as a human being that I think would be interesting if more people had that experience. We might treat each other a little differently.
Yeah, I think so too. To end this conversation, was wondering, do you have a wish or something you want to say to artists or to the humanity in general? Something you want to throw in the world, send in the world?
Yeah, probably a lot of things. I mean, yeah, I don't know if there's one thing in general. That I can boil it down to. I think for sure what I can say is that I'm often concerned that people think the arts are some sort of luxury, and that it's just an extra little thing that we do whenever we kind of have the time, and maybe we go to a movie one night and maybe we go. But if people realize how much the arts are infused into everything of our society, and there's this saying that is actually, I heard a misquote from Winston Churchill, but I like to believe that he actually said it, even though I think it's been proven that he did not say it. But in World War II, when they were asking if he was going to be cutting budgets of the arts and things in order to fund the war, he said, if I did that, what would we be fighting for? And I feel like that's an interesting thing, because I think we've gotten into a point where the love of money and capitalism has become the defining factor of our planet and of our world, of our human existence, let's say. And it's false. It's not anything real. It was intended to be a means to an end. And when the means to an end becomes the end, what are we doing? And so I find that things like the arts and meeting together, all kinds of different things like this, but really represented in the arts, it's one of the few places where you go into a theater to have an experience with other people and maybe meet afterwards and over a little drink and talk about what happened and share what your experience was. That used to happen more sometimes also in the church and stuff, but this has lost its status in the society anymore. So these experiences I find are really vital and important. And it's a reflection of our society. The artists are reflecting back. They're reflecting forward. They're reflecting in the now. They're kind of filtering everything that is about our societal existence in this moment in time into an artwork that is about communication in some way, and kind of revealing our humanity in a certain way that's very, very important, I think.
Yes.
It doesn't only have to be in a theater or an art piece, but I think that's where you most often see it. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I guess that's kind of what I would talk about.
Yes, it does. Let's have some more art in our world. So, David Hernandez, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience. It was really, really interesting and inspiring. Thank you.
Well, I hope. Thanks for asking me. It's lovely to talk to you.
You're welcome. Be sure to check our website on cross-roads.be and our Facebook page, Crossroads in Dance.